This is Steve Soltwick, and welcome to Your Brain, a Personal Tour, Seminar 5, The Neurogenesis of Human Culture. Today we talk about the human brain in all its glory. The goal of the seminar will be to investigate and present the unique capabilities of the human brain that give rise to the vibrant culture around us, some examples of which we saw in the opening sequence. We'll see that the truly unique aspects of the human brain are few. Just 3 capabilities, in my opinion, but over thousands of generations, each one of those capabilities had the tremendous power to bring about the culture we experience now. These capabilities built upon the primate brain capabilities we covered in Seminar 4. The point of the subtitle is to talk about the skill of teaching and its intriguing impact on the human brain and human culture. It's an underappreciated aspect of neuropsychological research, and we'll see that it can have significant influence on the way our culture develops, which is a wonderful way to frame this seminar to a class of lifelong learners. Welcome. I hope you enjoy the seminar. For those of you that enjoyed the opening sequence, I present a catalog of the images and their attributions for your reference. We'll include this slide in the deliverables for the presentation, but I just wanted to give you a brief look that yes, indeed, I do call out the names of each one of these images for future reference. An example of one of those 3 unique human capabilities was seen in our opening sequence. It involved the film of these little triangles. As far back as 1944, researchers found they could evoke mental state attribution when viewers watched silent animation of very simple shapes like triangles, circles, or others. In this film, I see a mother triangle, the large red one, trying to convince her child triangle, the little one, to leave the nest. The mother coaxes her child out. The child is fearful of leaving that nest and must be coaxed, in fact, even prevented from coming back in at one point, and then the mother and child experience the joy of playing outside of the nest. Is that what you saw? Now, I want you to think about this. We were watching 2 triangles. What was happening is your brain was projecting intention and emotion on lifeless but cute geometric forms. This is called mentalizing, and it is thought to be a key, unique human trait. Your dog or cat does not do this. You may do it to your dog, but your dog does not do it back. This trait sets up a massive amount of human cultural evolution, as we will shortly see. But let's look at the other 2 human unique capabilities next. Here we see the 3 capabilities that I assert are unique to the human brain. Mentalizing we've just talked about. It's what your mind did to those triangles, and it's part of a repertoire called theory of mind. Your brain devotes significant resources in thinking about other brains thinking or feeling. And this broad set of these capabilities we're going to call TOM for short. We'll see abbreviations like this through the presentation. Language is the second capability. Yes, Alex the parrot could talk and several primates can use sign language, but no other set of brains on this planet is so wired for language as humans. Human infants show amazing capabilities and behavior that far outstrip any other species. We'll look at that skill second. And then third, we'll look at natural pedagogy. This is human communication and theory of mind specifically adapted for the efficient transmission of cultural knowledge among a generation and across generations. Knowledge that would be almost impossible to learn by observation alone, that is by imitation, can be then passed using pedagogy from one generation to the next, so that the ever-expanding corpus of human knowledge can accumulate across thousands of generations, and hence give us medicine, airplanes, iPhones, and unfortunately, infomercials. In my reading of the literature, these 3 capabilities are the essential set of human unique traits that sets us apart from all other species, and that will be the focus of today's seminar. Now, the human brain builds upon expanded capabilities that we found in the primate brain, and we covered those in Seminar 4. There were 4 of them: a multisensory valuation of future outcomes, the learning of abstract categories, focused attention on a goal that was several steps removed from the current behavior, and strategies to deal with success and the unexpected. So the human unique capabilities build upon this expanded foundation, and that complete set of capabilities is what generate and drive human culture. Let's take a look of the theory of mind or mentalizing capability of your brain in more detail. And we'll use a different example to set off this section. Think about earlier in your life when you first went to college or first had your own apartment and you would go to the laundromat to wash your clothes. And suppose one day you go into the laundromat and you see a stranger taking your clothes out of the dryer. With only a few seconds of perceptual data about this stranger, a normal brain will mentalize, maybe he's going to steal my clothes. Maybe he's feeling amazingly generous and he just does this as random acts of kindness. Or maybe he falsely thinks the clothes are his. This native capability to reason about other people's actions in terms of mental states, their thoughts, their beliefs, their desires, emotions, and intentions is called a theory of mind. Using a test called a false belief test, researchers can show that a typical human child develops the capability for a theory of mind around the age of 4. Now, a false belief test probes whether the child can represent in their brain a false belief held in another brain, imaginary or real. Let's take a look at 2 examples. The first will be from a 3-year-old undergoing this false belief test, and then the second will be a 5-year-old. Note the differences.
Yes!
This is Sally, and this is Anne. All right? Now, Sally comes in with her marble. Sally puts her marble into the basket and goes out. Anne comes and gets the marble, and she puts the marble in the box. Here comes Sally. Here comes Sally. Now, where will Sally look for the marble?
There you go, Sally.
You got it for her. Hooray!
The ball in the box. Can you open the box for me? Can you close it? Joey decides to go outside. And then May takes the ball and she puts it in the basket. And then Joey comes back inside. And where do you think he'll look for the ball?
In here.
In there. Why will he look in there?
Because that's where I put the ball.
And where is it really?
So on the basis of this test, it's clear that a 5-year-old human brain can understand the fact that a different brain, imaginary brain, but different brain nonetheless, can have a false belief. This is a very consistent result. It's shown in rural children in Western societies, urban children in Western societies. It has been found in Peru, India, Samoa, and Thailand. It has even been found in hunter-gatherer children in Cameroon. Now, there are differences in acquisition. Children presenting autism spectrum disorder show significant delays in the acquisition of this capability, and we'll discuss that later in a following seminar. Just as there's a voluminous literature investigating theory of mind in humans, there's an equally voluminous literature investigating theory of mind in animals. Now, in past seminars, we saw the danger of claiming that a skill is, quote, human unique. But theory of mind has been intensively studied in other species, and the results in the vast majority show that primates and other animals just do not have this capability. David Premack, a legendary researcher on primate learning, and Doug Gillen, a UT graduate, did report one example of a theory of mind finding with the famous chimp Sarah. David is shown on the left, obviously, and Sarah at the age of 50 is shown on the right. But the results were rather weak, and future experiments showed they were not replicable. So while still controversial, and while still cognizant that one should use extreme care in holding that animals cannot do skill X, I hold that theory of mind is human unique, it drives a host of our cultural evolution, and is worthy of study in terms of its neural underpinnings, and we'll look at that next. Now, if we scan the brain during the performance of false belief tasks, we can see the activation of a specific brain circuit shown here in the slide. The top row shows scans from children 5 to 12 years old, and so therefore they would correctly answer in the false belief test. The bottom row shows brain scans from results. I highlight one area in particular called the temporal parietal junction, or TPJ for short. We will see this area of the brain in several slides during this section. Note, there's significant activity on both sides of the brain when we go through and scan during a false belief test. This circuit is activated when your brain has to consider another brain's perspective or belief. It is not activated when your brain considers a false photograph, a picture of a signpost pointing the wrong way, for example. The effect is very robust, and it's been replicated over several labs. Let's take a brief look at how we would scan a human brain. The machine we use is called a magnetic resonance imager, or MRI machine for short. Most of the studies we'll look at in this seminar use MRI technology to produce the brain scans. An MRI machine can image virtually any soft tissue of the human body. When we want to study the brain, we use a technique of MRI called functional MRI. In this technique, we measure changes in the brain associated with changes in energy metabolism, in this instance, blood flow. When an area of your brain is active, there's more blood that flows to it. We can detect that with this machine. This machine is rather daunting to use. It makes loud noises as it generates magnetic fields in order to image tissues of the body. If you've never experienced one, it can be quite daunting, and I have some sounds to illustrate. Even with earplugs, the noises can be quite loud. And notice your skull is inside the donut of that machine, and it can be quite claustrophobic. Therefore, there's a running joke in the neuropsychology area that when you study fMRI, you can get artifacts. In this cartoon, this researcher is finding that performing an MRI on memory tasks showed activity in the brain associated with loud noises, claustrophobia, and the removal of jewelry. Don't get me wrong, fMRIs are a very good tool to study the brain, but they come with caveats, and one is that it's a significant procedure to obtain them. Think about a 5-year-old in such a machine. We just need to be careful how we obtain the results and then how we interpret the results, and I have 2 more slides on that. An fMRI has 2 characteristics that are different from directly recording from brain neurons in an operating room. The first is since fMRI measures changes in energy metabolism, as in blood flow, which is shown in green on this left part of the slide, there is a time lag of those changes compared to directly recording from neurons, which are shown in the colored graphs. This is single and multiple unit activity as we might obtain in the operating room, which are shown in the line graphs. And then in the green area, we see changes in blood flow of oxygenated blood going to the area of the brain under study. Notice there is a significant lag. We just need to be aware of that in terms of the phenomenon we're studying as we scan the brain. The second is there's a spatial fuzziness to MRI. If we directly record from the brain, as shown here on the right, specific recording loci in the operating room, and those are the black dots, we can map out the brain related to hand and face activation. If we then do an fMRI on this same area of the brain, we'll find that the resolution is not as fine as the black dots. So we need to be aware of that as we interpret results. We're getting an average of brain activity over a much larger area than we would if we were directly recording brain cells. However, we can only directly record in an operating room. This would tremendously limit our ability to study the brain. So fMRI is a good technique, but again, it has caveats we must be aware of. The big caveat that we need to be aware of with fMRI is that fMRI is correlation. Now, correlation is a mathematical measure of how two things vary together over time. It's a very useful measure in many studies. But just because two measurements vary together over time do not mean that one causes the other. We can see two examples here on this slide. Billy is upset because every time the seatbelt sign comes on, the airplane ride gets bumpy. The graph shows a very highly correlated set of measurements. One, films that Nicolas Cage appears in, and two, the number of people who drowned in a pool. But one of the big rules of this area of study is that correlation is not necessarily causation. Nicolas Cage films are not causing people to drown, and not turning on the seatbelt sign wouldn't stop airplane turbulence. We just need to be aware of this as we look at correlational studies. Our theories about what is causing one variable to change with another is bolstered if not only using correlational data like fMRI, but we can use other data, stimulation, a recovery from lesions, other kinds of techniques to bolster the case over many dimensions that one thing is causing another to change. And we just need to be aware of that as we look at human brain scans in particular. With those caveats in mind, let's return to our analysis about the areas of your brain that constitute a theory of mind. Now, one thing to note is thinking about thoughts, the area of your brain, this TPJ region being a good example, that thinks about thoughts in other brains is separable from an area of your brain that thinks about actions and goals of other brains. In red, we see the kind of stimulus that would activate the TPJ junctions of your brain. They are stories that deal with other brains' thinking and thoughts or emotions. The green area, which is adjacent to this area in your brain, thinks about the biological motion or key attributes of movements, actions, if you will, of other brains. But there's a unique aspect to this area of your brain shown in green. It subjects those actions and movements to a set of normative behaviors. We show that by taking someone in a brain scanner and showing them 3 individual movies. They all deal with calling an elevator. Now, in one instance, the person calling the elevator has their hands full, and this is shown on the extreme right. They have their hands full of binders, their hands are not free, they use their knee to call the elevator, in other words, to push the button. At the other end of the video, you see someone with nothing in their hands, and they're using their knee to call the elevator. And then there's kind of a middle case where there's only one binder. Clearly it could be held by one hand, and now we're using the knee to push the elevator button. This area in green in your brain subjects the analysis of movement to a normative comparison. When it's plausible that you're using your knee, in this example, to call an elevator, because your hands are full, the area is not activated. However, when it's unusual, when there's nothing in your hands and you're using your knee to call an elevator, which is a highly unusual act, then this area becomes active. So it's not just thinking about actions and goals of people, or other brains in this instance, that part we're showing here in green, but it's thinking about the actions and goals of people subject to normative considerations. And that's what makes this part of your brain extremely intriguing to study. We know from the behavioral studies of the false belief test that the theory of mind network changes with age. And this is a study of the neural underpinnings of that. We're going to show brains 3 different kinds of stories while they're in the fMRI scanner. One set of stories, called mental, talks about people's thoughts, beliefs, and feelings. A different set of stories, called social, talks about people's appearance and social relationships, but not about their thoughts or beliefs. And then a third set, called physical, just talks about objects, trees, bicycles. It does not talk about anything to do with people at all. We play these stories as individuals of different ages or within a brain scanner. The stories are told during the gray bars that you see on the bottom of this slide, and we're scanning the particular part of the brain we talked about before, this TPJ area. This is on the right side of the brain in this particular scan, and we're interested in how does this area of the brain in particular react to these stories, and more importantly, how does it change over time? The main thing we see, the most significant effect, is that over time, this area of the brain, the TPJ area, the theory of mind network, gets more selective with age. As that brain grows up, it becomes more and more focused on the mental aspect of the stories. So as that brain grows up, it is more and more selected to stories about mental aspects of the brain. This turns out to also affect moral decisions. We'll see that in a moment. And remember, it's just correlational data. We see a strong case for the right TPJ being correlated with selective processing of information about other brains' mental state. This grows with age. Now, is there any other information that shows this from a corresponding point of view, say with stimulation? And the answer is yes. The tool we're going to use in this experiment is called transcranial direct stimulation. A picture is shown on the top left of the slide. It is unique in that it allows us to either excite or depress certain areas of the brain without opening the skull, and that makes it a very interesting research tool. Now, we're going to construct stories that can have different kinds of outcomes and different situations of belief on an actor within that story. We show on the bottom left all of the potential threads of a given story set. This is not the story that someone will hear as we stimulate their brain. It is a set of all possible threads that could be presented. In this scenario, there's a customer in a restaurant. Now, something's going to happen to this customer, and we'll set up a context and an outcome depending upon whether they're allergic to sesame seeds or not. Some of the people in this experiment are going to hear that the customer loves sesame seeds and he's just fine in terms of, he has no problem in terms of eating them. Other subjects are going to hear that the customer is allergic to sesame seeds and he could die if he eats them. The actor in this environment is a waitress by the name of Kate. Kate is either aware of the customer's allergy or not. If we then look at all possible outcomes and both possible outcomes, let's say, and both possible belief states of Kate, the actor in this environment, we get the outcome matrix shown on the right. If the outcome is negative, i.e. the customer dies, yet Kate the waitress didn't know they were allergic to the food, then her belief state was neutral, and really the outcome here, the psychological outcome, is accidental harm. The agent did not intend to generate harm on the particular customer. If the outcome is neutral, yet Kate was aware of the allergy and went ahead and delivered sesame seeds to the customer, but somehow miraculously they didn't die, then this is the cell called attempted harm. There was ill will on the part of the actor, but somehow the outcome was neutral. Now, if we stimulate by applying transcranial direct stimulation, this right TPJ junction, which is implicated in the theory of mind network, we find that over several different stories, we can manipulate the amount of belief that Kate applies, or that a subject would apply regarding Kate's behavior in this environment. The more the stimulation, the more that the subject who's listening to this story would reduce the blame for accidental harm. They would put more and more weight in terms of the belief state of Kate. This is complementary to the correlational data that we've seen before from the brain scans. So there are a number now of avenues that point to a theory of mind network, one of which major centers is this TPJ junction, and that makes it a very interesting finding. Recent research has brought new light upon the possibility that primates, especially chimpanzees, may have a rudimentary theory of mind. Recall that Premack and Gillen tested for theory of mind in the adult chimpanzee Sarah and found early indications that weren't replicated over time. New research in fact that was published in October of 2016, show that when chimpanzees observe an equivalent of a Sally Ann test, objects are being moved without an observer's knowledge. And by using sophisticated eye tracking techniques, chimpanzees do seem to display a knowledge about the beliefs of others. This is an exciting result, and it just confirms the old adage that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Chimpanzees and other primates may have rudimentary theories of mind. Clearly, they do not have the capabilities of a 5-year-old in terms of verbal capability and false belief tests. But this is an exciting result and shows that perhaps some of our closest primate ancestors had rudimentary theories of minds similar to humans. A capability closely related to theory of mind that we do share with many, but not all animals, is the expression of empathy. Mother Nature has endowed many of our relatives with this social emotion, including primates, elephants, canines, in other words dogs and wolves, but even certain species of birds like ravens and magpies, and some rodents like the prairie voles shown here. As it turns out, there's a separate neural circuit for this capability, different from the theory of mind circuit we just investigated, and I want to explore that next. When your brain mentalizes about another brain, it may not evaluate the thoughts of that other brain. It may evaluate emotions and feelings. This skill is called empathy. It's the ability to share the feelings of another brain. Empathy is a fundamental part of the human condition and culture, and it deserves study as well. Now, if you scan the brain of a subject who is directly experiencing some kind of sensation, and we're going to use pain here as a sample sensation, it could be many others, but let's just work with pain, and you study that subject as they are directly experiencing pain and compare that scan to one in where the subject is observing someone else in pain, you find certain high-level brain areas in common. They're shown here on the scan in orange. This means that empathy truly is a vicarious experience. Part of your brain really does feel the pain, at least at a higher cortical level, of someone else. Further, this circuit is separate from the theory of mind network circuit we have seen and been discussing so far. But wait, there are complications on how you test for empathy. If you test as shown in the lower right, which involves a couple, usually they're married, they could be significant others, one is in the brain scanner and one is outside the brain scanner. And you cue for pain in the abstract. So these are like arrows, and the arrows indicate whether someone themselves is going to get pain or that their significant other is going to get pain. And if you scan for brain activity then at that point, you will find that not only is an empathy circuit activated, but a theory of mind circuit is activated. In other words, you're thinking about the other's experience of pain. There's a separate perspective here to consider. If the test, as shown on the right, is just a subject in the scanner seeing a picture of how another person will experience pain, the example on the top right is a prick to the hand, or below that is a stubbing of the toe, then the theory of mind network is not active, but the empathy circuit and the mirror network is active. We covered the mirror network in previous seminars. It's as if the motor act is being analyzed for its intention and planning is going on how to avoid this particular painful stimulus. So empathy is a complex, multidimensional process in your brain, and it can be modulated by surprising events. One of the most intriguing modulators of the empathy circuit is social. Let's take a study of one part of the circuit, a place called the anterior insula, shown by the red circle in this scan, and we're going to do two things. The first is we're going to have subjects play an economic game with either a fair or unfair research assistant before the brain scan. We then scan their brains as we show the subject a cue for pain or no pain for the research assistant. Now it turns out that females are highly empathetic, and that's shown with the purple bars in the top half of this diagram. They're less empathetic for the unfair player, but compare that to the males. The males are positively revengeful. Males have no empathy for an unfair player. In fact, they want to punish them. Alternately, we could measure empathy when the subject is either within or without a group. In this instance, we'll study males where the in group means the subject and whoever we're indicating pain for are rooting for the same soccer team. So the group is we're all rooting for the same soccer team. If the person being given pain is a member of an out group, that means they root for a competitive soccer team, and then we'll see the difference. In this instance, you can see that males are much more empathetic to members of their own group compared to members of an out group. This means that empathy is highly selective, and social factors need to be considered in its study and modulation. We can use our understanding of the neural circuits for theory of mind and empathy to better understand human behavior. And let's take two examples. Temple Grandin is on the left and is legendary in the field of livestock management. Dexter is on the right, a famous psychopath on a hit TV series. Temple presents autism spectrum disorder. People in this condition can clearly be shown to have a range of difficulty in mentalizing about the thoughts and beliefs of others. However, their ability to share the feelings of others, that is, empathy, is intact. In fact, in Temple's instance, it's legendary. Using her empathy, she has done amazing things in the progressing of livestock management, especially at slaughterhouses, and she has made tremendous contributions to the industry along this path. Dexter, on the other hand, has an intact theory of mind network. He understands well how people tick, and he uses that to his advantage. However, Dexter has no empathy circuit for processing or engaging with his victims. He does not feel their pain or regret it. Perhaps with transcranial stimulation or other advanced techniques, we can begin to alter Dexter's empathy circuits and make him a better productive member of society. Further research will see. Before we conclude this section, I want to say a few words about self-awareness and consciousness. Now, self-awareness is a major topic of brain research, and rightly so. A key question for the understanding of the brain is, how does consciousness arise? It is the hard problem of neuroscience, and one that we must creep up on carefully. An intriguing result is that the recognition of your own face activates the theory of mind network. Now, my interpretation of this effect, and it's speculation on my part, is that one's brain is reflecting on itself as another brain. This kind of processing by your brain may be impactful in the construction of a conscious experience, for it is the brain being aware of itself. Recalling that the theory of mind network seems to be unique to humans, then, we would speculate that no other animal would have this type of cognition. It would also allow us to rewrite René Descartes' famous expression, "I think, therefore I am," into slightly a different thought of, "I am aware of my thoughts, therefore I am human." More research on this is clearly needed, but it's a promising area of investigation into human consciousness. It's time now for Homer to join us again and give us his thoughts on the key messages of this section. The first thought Homer wants to share is cool. Human brains are unique in thinking about thoughts in other brains. There is a specific neural circuit for this. It's the theory of mind network. Tremendous amounts of research seem to indicate that's unique to humans, so therefore we are the only species really aware of our thoughts. And this sets a major direction and driver of human culture. The second thing Homer would say is thinking about our brains don't just think about thoughts. They also think and are aware of feelings and sensations in other brains, and that's the empathy network. It's different from the theory of mind network, although often they're co-activated, especially when people that are close to us or loved ones are affected by pain or other sensations. Knowing that there's different underpinnings here give us better understanding of human behavior and perhaps techniques to address situations like psychopathology in terms of restoring balance to empathy networks that are out of whack. We now turn our attention to the second unique aspect of human brains, the facility for language. No other species seem to be wired for language like humans, whether that is speech, gesture or sign, or writing like the Mayan glyphs we see on the right. Our brains are endowed with a spectrum of language skills that are clearly the apex of animal capability. Let's see what that means in more detail. Several years ago, there was a simple story to the way your brain processed language. On the left side of your head, there were two areas that fundamentally process speech. Broca's area was responsible for how you said what you wanted to say. Wernicke's area interpreted the speech you heard. Note the path between the two, which bypasses the vocal cords. That's the path for the inner voice in your head. Today, this diagram is still mostly valid, but we need to change the words related to speech and hearing to words associated with communication. That is to say, because Broca's area not only helps your brain figure out what to say out loud, it is also involved if you sign your speech, or even if you pantomime your speech. In this instance, let's open a jar. Broca's area seems to be a pattern generator for motor programs to communicate, either in speech, gesture, or pantomime. Likewise, Wernicke's area is not just about hearing words, but also about reading words, and surprisingly about pantomiming words and phrases. In this instance, the phrase, "I've got it." This is a fascinating area of study. Right now, I want to emphasize that these language areas are not just about making the sounds of speech, They seem to be trying to communicate a thought via whatever motor program is most efficient or available in the communication path. In over 95% of the population, regardless of handedness, the majority of complex language processing is contained in the left hemisphere of your brain. We can use split brain patients, therefore, to help us further understand how language is processed in your brain. Recall that split brain patients have had their brains transected as a function of the treatment of epilepsy or some other neurological condition. And recall further that brains control the contralateral side of the body. So therefore, the left brain controls the right side of the body. The right brain controls the left side of the body. With split brain patients, we can present separate pictures to each side of the brain and then query the subject for how they are processed. In one famous experiment shown here on the left, a chicken foot was shown to the left language half of the brain and a snow scene to the right. The patient was then asked to pick out appropriate pictures with each hand. Since the right hand is controlled by the left brain, a rooster head was selected by the right hand. Likewise, a shovel was selected by the left hand. The subject, when asked why the shovel, didn't mention the snow scene. His left language area was not aware of it. He replied that you need a shovel to clean out a chicken coop. The next panel shows that the right brain is not completely absent in language skills. However, they are minimal. It cannot process complex grammar, but it can read words. Here, laugh or walk. In these panels, the patient correctly read the words presented to the right brain and then correctly performed the behavior. However, the left brain, which did not have knowledge of the word presented to the right brain, so when the subject was asked why were they laughing or walking, the patient basically made up a story. No, the story was not surreal. It was a rational explanation of the behavior, just not grounded in fact. We'll use these insights in the next seminar to explain some psychological disorders. While language is notoriously complex, Chomsky famously coined the term digital infinity to reflect the power of language. The theory of mind attributes in your brain, which we just discussed in the last section, offers an excellent foundation for a framework of language. A theory of mind framework for language means that language is a tool for transmitting one brain's mental state to another brain. Speech is probably the most effective modality, but gesture, pantomime, writing can also be effective. For this framework to be useful, we should see a coupling or synchrony between a speaker's brain and a listener's brain when we scan brains listening to a story. And guess what? That's exactly what we see. On the right side of this diagram, the areas in blue depict synchronization between a speaker's brain and a listener brain when a speaker relays a story. The synchrony is reflected in correlation of brain scans. Now, correlation is not necessarily causation, so it's appropriate to ask if there's other compelling results that show a coupling between a speaker's brain and a listener's brain, or between brains listening to stories. And guess what? There are. Another way to show theory of mind impact on brain synchronization is to show how coupling between two brains that relate to the meaning of stories. This slide presents a good example. In this experiment, there is one story. The story has been translated into Russian. There are two classes of listeners. One is composed of native Russian speakers, and the other class is composed of native English speakers. If we play one version of the story, let's say in Russian in this example, shown on the top part of the slide, there is very little coupling between the brains of listeners. Any coupling would be shown in orange on the brain diagrams. However, if we play the story in Russian to Russian people, and we play the story in English to English people, there is significant correlation in the brains. These areas, shown in orange here, show that the brains are locking on to the meaning of the storylines. I'll note in passing, you can see the same effect when people watch a movie together. So the brains in this example are synchronizing to the meaning of the story, not its sound. Another experiment that shows how theory of mind circuits are active in language processing varies the demands on the listener to consider another brain's mental state. Here's a good example. In this example, we scan the brains of a listener when they hear the phrase, "It's hard to give a good presentation." Now there's two preconditions. In the direct condition, the listener hears a simple direct question prior to that statement that requires no evaluation of the mental state of the speaker. Is it hard to give a good presentation? The answer is simple. It is hard to give a good presentation. It's a matter of fact. In the indirect case, the listener hears an ambiguous question, the meaning of which requires consideration of the mental state of the speaker. The theory of mind circuit, especially the right TPJ, is active only in the indirect situation. Thus, listener brains are always evaluating the incoming communication for triggers to consider a speaker's mental state. This assists the listener's brain in coming into synchrony with the speaker's brain. In addition to the synchronization of processing between brains, recent research has shown that there's an amazing similarity in the semantic maps between brains, at least of the same culture. In April of 2016, researchers at University of California, Berkeley, published a dramatic map of the brain. The map related to the cartography of word meanings across several listeners. We'll play the video of this presentation in just a minute, but I want to emphasize the finding here. The meaning of words, the semantics, are grouped in similar areas across different brains. These groupings imply a common framework for meaning of human brains, at least for the brains of students in Northern California. We'll note that the semantics of words are stored across both sides of the brain. Language production may be a product of the left side of the brain. Word semantics seem to be a global aspect of your brain. Now, it will be fascinating to see if this holds up across cultures, what the similarities and differences are. That research has not been done yet. Watch this space. It's going to be some very interesting results in videos very soon. Let's see what the researchers documented in the video that they published in April of 2016.
This is a map of someone's brain, showing roughly which areas respond when they hear different words. For example, there's a small area in the middle frontal gyrus that reliably responds to hearing the word top. But it's not just one word, one location. A single word can activate a whole range of different brain regions. So we find the word top in a bit of brain that seems to respond to words associated with clothing and appearances. But also here with numbers and measurements. And here with buildings and places. We usually think of language as being restricted to certain sections, like the temporal lobe. So researchers were surprised to find activity all across the brain and in both hemispheres. The map was made by scientists at the University of California, Berkeley. They put volunteers in an MRI scanner and had them listen to stories for 2 hours.
Back in the front again, deep, deep, and she pulls out a pack of matches that have been laundered at least once.
By monitoring blood flow to different parts of the brain, they worked out which places were responding to the meaning of the words, the semantics. They found that different bits of the brain responded to different kinds of words and concepts. And they could group them into rough categories, shown here by the different colours. Dark green bits, for example, were most activated by words to do with numbers, red bits by social words. Here in the right temporoparietal junction, this speck of brain, just a few millimetres across, was found to respond to words like wife, mother, pregnant and family. And this bit just next door responds to some of the same social words like family and wife. but also words to do with places and people, like house and owner. Generally, the concepts represented in each brain region relate to other functions that scientists already know about. So words to do with how things look, such as stripes, are likely to be found near the visual cortex. And although each individual's map is different, looking at these three brains, it's clear that different people have the same kinds of concepts in the same kinds of places. This is the first time we've been able to map the semantic systems of the brain in such detail, discovering that words are grouped by meaning, and revealing just how complicated and widespread the word maps in our heads really are. And the brain map is available online for anyone to explore.
I draw your attention to the fact that there is a great similarity between the brains of different people as to where the meaning of a particular word is stored. Yes, each individual is different, but there's a surprising and significant congruence among the brains tested. Different people seem to store the meaning of a word in roughly the same place. That opens up a host of opportunities, one of which I hope does not gain widespread acceptance. I show here a slide from the latest Facebook Developers Conference in 2017. Facebook wants to use this kind of information to allow you to tweet or send messages directly from your brain. You think it, you tweet it. That is a terrible idea. I leave the real-life parallels to the viewer's imagination. Of more interest and importance, I think, are the fields of study that are enabled by this kind of research. The holy grail of semantic research is how are words and concepts stored in the brain. This kind of research has progressed our understanding in ways that are surprising. For example, we now know in all likelihood that the diagram on this slide, which was the leading candidate of how meanings and concepts are stored in your brain, is not correct. A computer programmer might say this diagram is a great theory of meaning. A brain scientist now would not. The model of your brain shown here shows a rigid hierarchy in how concepts are stored. Specific information is stored at the lowest level and more general information is stored at higher levels. A word or concept at one level inherits all the properties of the elements above it. So, for example, a canary can specifically sing, as shown here. And since a canary is a bird, it can fly. And since a bird is an animal, it can move. And since an animal is a living thing, it can grow. While elegant as a computer model, this is just not the way your brain does it. And as you might guess, it's a bit more complicated and a bit more messy, at least for my brain. Here is a diagram which I believe is much closer to the representation of words and concepts in your brain. Nouns are called items, verbs are called relations, and they are associated with attributes with connections, which in real life would be neuron-to-neuron connections. Experience and learning, that is memory, can strengthen or weaken the connections over time with the mechanisms we studied in seminars 2 and 3. Let's take a look at our example again. The combination of an item, canary, and a relation, can, is related through a mess of connections to the appropriate attributes, grow, move, fly, and sing. These connections have been learned over time. This kind of structure is much more helpful in explaining the behavior of patients with a type of stroke called semantic dementia. The model is also very helpful in explaining how a normal brain works. Let's see how. The model of semantics, or meaning, that we've been exploring is expressed in the brain with what is termed a hub and spoke system of the temporal cortex. that part of your brain by your temples. Of note is that each attribute of an item, that is, of a concept or word, is individually expressed in the appropriate sensory or motor area of the brain and then collected into a multimode hub at the end of your temporal lobe. This kind of model has been very successful in explaining brain operations, and I want to emphasize two major points. First, the meaning of a word or concept is multimodal. It has aspects of sight, sound, the other senses, but also aspects of how it is used, in other words, its function, how it is gripped, in other words, praxis, how it is pronounced, etc. This is a critical insight from the model and for semantic memory. Second, the hub that receives all this information represents the concept as a sum of all the factors. This concept corresponds well to how the brain seems to work normally and when the brain is damaged. Semantic dementia patients may lose some memory of how to handle an object, that is, lose praxis, but still know what the object is when they look at it, or vice versa. That is exactly the symptoms we see. Let me illustrate this model of the brain in operation. The hub-and-spoke network of the temporal lobe represents objects in a multimodal way with some kind of default organization. Here we see objects categorized like the way we may have learned them in school. Birds together, fish together, flowers together, and trees together. The function of this network in your brain is to represent objects, and it does that across all the sense modalities as well as many other dimensions, for example, the type of motion. Now, we give you, and that means your brain, a task to do. Let's say sort those objects by the type of motion they have, or by their color. We see a different area of your brain getting involved, the prefrontal cortex. That part of your brain is the control network. It represents the task or the rule to use. We show the two tasks here, selection for type of motion or selection for color. Now, this is an amazing concept. It is a real window on how humans think, and there will be much exciting research coming in the near term.
It's time now for Homer to weigh in, and Homer's 2 points are as follows. First, consider language a tool to transmit mental states from one brain to another. This transmittal can range from hard coupling, so that we're, quote, on the same page, to manipulation, for example, lying about your mental state. This is a theory of mind framework which has great utility in underpinning research results and helping us understand future directions of language investigation. The second is that semantics, meanings in normal brains, seem to be stored in standard locations amongst the brains sampled so far. Note, they're all in the same culture so far. Now, this might indicate an effective culture. More experiments are needed. But it'll be extremely interesting to see what various studies show from varying culture or as a result of psychological dysfunction. In this last section, we'll consider a large body of animal research which concludes that humans are the only species which, as a whole, utilize a communication framework allowing and facilitating the transfer of knowledge to novices, not just family members, but widespread members of tribes or larger social groups. We'll call this framework natural pedagogy, and we'll present its key characteristics in the human species. 1. Infants are wired to learn from birth onward. 2. Theory of mind, language, and mirror circuitry in the human brain makes it possible to mirror the intent of a demonstrator in terms of the manufacturer of tools. And then third, the rewarding effect of being understood enabled a positive feedback cycle of pedagogy. This cycle gave humans evolutionary advantage which over thousands of generations resulted in the culture we see today. It's a new area of research, and I think it offers stunning insights into human culture. The first capability shown by human infants for supporting pedagogy is sensitivity to what is termed ostensive gestures. This capability is present at 4 months of age and might even be present earlier. Ostensive gestures are gestures that signify intentional communication. A good example is a direct eye gaze or a raised eyebrow. Human infants are very sensitive to these gestures, as shown on this slide. The top tracing is an EEG brain scan of a 4-month-old infant under 2 conditions. The top row is the infant seeing a face with a diverted gaze, and then the face raises an eyebrow and smiles. As you can see, there's no significant EEG or brain activation. In the bottom row, it shows the reaction of the infant to the same eyebrow raise and smile, but this time the face is directly gazing at the infant. Both gestures significantly affect the EEG. Similar effects has been shown for other primary ostensive gestures, motherese or baby talk. Net-net, the infant is barely out of the womb, but it's very much in tune with efforts to communicate with them. By 6 months of age, the infant is reliably using ostensive gestures to initiate gaze following. In this example, an experimenter uses eye contact in the top row, or motherese, baby talk, in the bottom row, to signal an imminent communication. A direct gaze at one of 2 toys. That's shown in the final picture on this panel. If there is an ostensive gesture, eye contact, or a motherese hello, then the infant reliably follows the gaze towards the ball. If there's no ostensive gesture, no eye contact, or no infant-directed greeting, then there is not. To ensure that the looking of the infant was equivalent between the 2 instances, when there was no eye contact, a colorful cartoon was placed on the head of the experimenter. So this flower-looking symbol that you see on the top head of the experimenter is to ensure the infant did turn and orient towards the experimenter to ensure that the situation was similar between eye contact and no contact in terms of total amount of time looking. The only difference was there eye contact or not? By 9 months of age, the infant has mastered the distinction between an ostensive pointing movement and a simple reaching for an object. In this experiment, the infant observes an experimenter either reaching for an object or pointing to an object. Following this, the infant's view is blocked for 5 seconds. When the occluding screen is removed, in the reaching situation, the infant will note a change in the position with increased looking, but not a change in the object itself. The interpretation here is that the infant understood the intention of the motor act, reach there, but did not attach any importance to the object. In the pointing example, the infant was surprised and looked longer if the object was changed. The ostensive gesture of pointing signaled that the object was important, and therefore any change was significant. These capabilities set the stage for pedagogy, and we can see their impact when we look at tool making in the Stone Age. This slide shows a simple stone cutting tool that is found in the historical record from about 2 million years ago. The tool is classified as Oldowan, and it is very, very crude. It's made with flaking chips off a core stone with strikes from a hammerstone. Research in the lab have demonstrated that primates like chimpanzees can create Oldowan tools merely by imitating the striking movements of the hammerstone as demonstrated by a tool maker. There's no need for ostensive gestures. There's no need for understanding the intention of the motor act. It is simply a matter of imitation. And that was probably the state of play 2 million years ago. Between 2 million and 700,000 years ago, tool making evolved to the diagram you see on this slide. 2 workers cooperate to work on a much more advanced stone cutting tool called an Acheulean blade. An example of the blade is shown on the top right. The blade is far more effective than the previous Oldowan tools. It can be attached to a pole or handle to form a very effective killing weapon. With such a weapon, larger prey could be killed and consumed. The important point here is that research has shown that merely imitating the motor acts of a demonstrator will not produce a good tool. The intent of the tool maker needs to be copied. That is, that there is a sharp edge to be fashioned from the core stone. The specific motor acts to create such an edge will vary from core stone to core stone. Imitation will simply not cut a good tool. Now, when we scan the brains of people making such a tool, we see activity in the mirror system, as shown in the red circle here, and the prefrontal cortex. We've seen in previous seminars that these are areas of your brain that support goal-directed behavior and analysis and replication of the intent of motor actions. So at this stage of brain evolution, the demonstrator has a brain that has a theory of mind as well as language areas. The demonstrator's brain is thinking about what the other brain is contemplating and has a language capability, speech or gesture or pantomime, to contain the intent of his tool-making actions. This is one highly possible action for pedagogy to arise. There could be others, but I think this scenario is a good working explanation. At the risk of presenting research that confirms the obvious, the final driver I want to look at is the rewarding value of being understood. We show this by having students record a video clip which they think will be reviewed by other students. We then scan their brains when they hear the reviews. Researchers manipulated standard replies so that in some of the reviews, supportive statements about how the reviewer felt or acted was contained, and that's shown in the understood block on the top. Other statements were given to other students that basically indicated that the reviewers did not understand the video. Uniquely, for the being understood block, both the theory of mind circuit, considering the perspective of others, as well as the reward circuit were activated. Voila! The blatantly obvious now has neural underpinning. If you allow me rank speculation, consider the demonstrator in a tool-making situation 700,000 years ago. He, and it was a he, had the same brain as males do today. His theory of mind circuit is trying to communicate the intent of a goal for an advanced stone weapon. When information comes back to the demonstrator's brain that he's being understood, that's rewarding, and hence likely to be repeated again and again and again. Not only does being understood make the demonstrator feel good, it also drives a process of cultural transmission. This could relate to stone tools, cooking recipes, or creation myths. As it turns out, pedagogy or teaching sets up a system which is the most reliable way to specifically transmit information across generations. Now, the figure shows a model of what would happen over multiple generations in terms of a pattern that rug weavers in Central Asia would produce as part of a specific rug ornament. The highest fidelity is from the teaching path. So for skills that are the most demanding, tool use, cooking, technology, others, tribes that use the teaching or pedagogy route will culturally transmit the best information on that skill across generations. Other methods are clearly present and possible. They're just not as efficient for transmitting information across generations. Scientific discussions are only now finally considering the impacts of pedagogy in terms of the archaeological record and in terms of human culture. Until recently, the discussions were few and far between. Imitation can explain much in the evolution of our species, but complex and difficult to master skills, stone tools, pottery making, textile making, cooking, seem to require guidance and control of the learning activities of children, that is, application of the skills of pedagogy. As we have seen, human children are wired to learn from virtually birth. Adults have brains that think and feel about other brains. Language gives us capability to efficiently synchronize mental states among those brains and to feel rewarded in the process. It thus seems highly likely that pedagogy evolved for the betterment of the species, betterment in diet, longevity, and culture as shown on this slide. It's time for Homer to make his final appearance in the seminar, and Homer has two simple points to make. The first is humans are born wired to learn. This is an essential element and driver of our evolution and culture. And the second is teaching and pedagogy is truly a divine calling. It is essential to the positive development of human culture and evolution, even though it can be used to take people to the dark side. It is underappreciated in the research literature, both in terms of human neuropsychology and evolution anthropology. Recent scholarly research will be much appreciated to understand this element of our evolution and culture in more detail. This concludes Seminar 5. I hope you enjoyed it. In Seminar 6, our final seminar, we'll talk about how the ecosystem of your brain can go wrong, with aging, with damage from stroke, from miswiring. I promise it won't be a downer. We'll also cover the most recent research on repair of function. There is much to be excited about in this area, while admittedly there's still much to do. The subtitle of the talk is Dog Walking and the Jedi Monkey. You'll have to wait on the Jedi Monkey, but you will be amazed at what dog walking can do to repair an aging brain. We look forward to joining you again in Seminar 6. Thanks again for your attention.